Hello, this is Mash It and Smash It, but you can call me Mash or Mash It for short. Well, I think the movie I have for today is something you might call a massive effort. But the legacy it has is rather tiny. But that's not to say that it doesn't have a giant fan base. This is Gulliver's Travels. The movie, released in December of 1939, was produced by the legendary animator Max Fleischer, famous for iconic cartoons like Betty Boop, Popeye, and the animated Superman series, and directed by his younger brother, Dave. As is clearly written in everything I've read about this movie, it was made as a direct response to Disney's Snow White. So yeah, we have our first animated film to blatantly piggyback off of another success. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but down the road I will surely be seeing some movies that follow others' examples without any effort into what made the originals work. Naturally, there will be comparisons between this movie and Snow White, like how we have a rotoscoped human interacting with a bunch of cartoonish little people. Only this time, they're even littler. And since I reviewed another movie based on the same Jonathan Swift book, there will also be comparisons with New Gulliver. The movie focuses on an explorer named Lemuel Gulliver, whose boat is wrecked in a storm, washing him up on the shore of Lilliput. As the townspeople capture him, he finds himself involved in a war between the Lilliputians and their rival kingdom, Blefuscu. Proving to be a valuable warrior for Lilliput, Blefuscu's King Bombo sends 3 spies to find a way to take down the giant. And there's not a whole lot else to say, at least regarding the abridged version of the story. There are a few other details worth discussing. The main thing is the actual conflict between Lilliput and Blefuscu, and why they're even fighting in the first place. You see, the princess of the former and the prince of the latter were being arranged to get married, but the 2 kings started arguing over which of their kingdom's national anthems should play at the wedding, leading to King Bombo calling off the wedding and declaring war. This leads to your typical Romeo and Juliet situation between the 2 young lovers. While you could definitely consider this a silly reason to start a war, first of all, judging from this movie's comic tone, that seems to be the idea, and second of all, this is actually apparently true to the nature of Lilliput in the original story, where major political arguments are started over very trivial matters. Not like in real life, especially modern times. We also have a subplot involving King Bombo's spies, who are struggling to find a way to kill a man who could step on them like roaches. Soon they find the gun that Gulliver had in his pocket, and try to use it to shoot him. They don't quite succeed. While the story is nothing spectacular by today's standards, it is a step up from most of the ones I've covered in previous videos, as it deals with war and division, which I guess is pretty brave for the time it came out, as World War II was starting up at the time. Though to be fair, they've been working on the movie for about 2 years, and the war started just a few months prior. Quite a bit different than just portraying Lilliput as a bunch of corrupt dictators to be overthrown by the lower class workers. That's a different social commentary. The animation is quite impressive for the most part, though pretty simple at the same time. I guess I might just be a little spoiled by Snow White, but the textures in this movie aren't quite as good as what else I've seen. But it is worth noting that Fleischer made it a point to take a slightly different approach than Disney did to their works. Whereas Disney went for feel-good family entertainment, this went more in the silly, cartoonish direction. So the simple designs and goofy slapstick were intended to give the audience something a little different than what Disney gave them, which I respect. That said, in an effort to release this movie on time, there was a very rushed production schedule, which unfortunately shows at times in the final product. There are moments where the animation gets a little choppy, leading to dropped frames and the like. Again, I suppose I might just be spoiled by Snow White, with how carefully put together every single frame was, and how beautifully fluid it all looked. Needless to say, Gulliver's Travels failed to live up to its rival in the animation department. The setting doesn't look half bad, though there's not much to say about it as it's pretty typical of a lot of cartoons being released in that era. It's another department where Snow White wins, but again, judging by the comic tone of the movie, they weren't trying to make it beautiful, just entertaining. I actually do quite enjoy the characters of the film. While they're not quite at the level of the dwarfs or the evil queen, they are for the most part quite entertaining. The titular hero, while there's not much to him, actually manages to have kind of a likable presence to him. Apparently they were originally going to cast Popeye in the role of Gulliver, which would have made this the first ever full-length movie based on a cartoon series. But they scrapped that idea and instead got a radio announcer who won a contest to play the character. They originally intended to just have him as the voice, but found that he looked the part as well, so they used him as their rotoscoping model as well. It was a good casting choice, as he looks handsome yet also big and tough, and you gotta love his smooth, suave voice.
Well, good. Then let me present myself. My name is Gulliver, Your Majesty. Lemuel Gulliver, a shipwrecked sailor. At your service.
Well, welcome to Lilliput, Mr. Gulliver. Mr. Gulliver, can you fight?
Well, Your Majesty, I can lick anybody my size.
I'm not gay, but... Now, the rotoscoping, while impressive, is about 10 times as uncanny valley as the characters in Snow White were. It doesn't help that the other characters are even more cartoony than the ones in the other film, making it even more jarring. Also, there was a little more texture in Snow White, so the flat colors can actually make Gulliver look borderline creepy. But nonetheless, it is one of the unique aspects about this movie that stands out. Of course, the best characters are still the comedic ones. Fun fact, my family actually had a bunch of VHS tapes that had various cartoons on them, several of which were lit off by the same 4 Casper the Friendly Ghost cartoons. One of the Casper tapes included a cartoon starring the character Gabby, and for the longest time I had no idea that the character originated from this movie. Yeah, apparently the creators liked this character enough to give him his own spin-off cartoon series, which was pretty short-lived. But nonetheless, he's pretty entertaining, despite his squeaky voice being just a little annoying. But thankfully, unlike New Gulliver, he's one of the few characters that sounds like that, and the only one that talks that much, so it's tolerable here. Also, interestingly enough, the man who voiced him was a regular voice actor for Disney, providing the voice for characters like Goofy, Pluto, and here's the real kicker, Grumpy and Sleepy. Yeah, the man who voiced 2 of the Seven Dwarfs went on to voice a character in the movie made specifically to compete with the previous one he did. Pretty crazy. The 2 kings are also quite entertaining. We don't see a whole lot of King Bombo, but when we do, his overly proud attitude makes for some good gags. But even more entertaining is the Meet King Little, who has a lot of scenes trying to be tough, but failing at that.
When I get my dandruff up, look out.
But the characters that steal the movie are the spies. I would not be surprised if that took some inspiration from these guys. So much entertaining slapstick from these 3, especially from the most incompetent member of the group, Snitch. The best aspects of this movie can pretty much be summed up by these guys. It makes sense that they also got a spin-off cartoon, which didn't last much longer than the Gabby cartoon. As for the weakest characters of the film, I would have to give it to the Prince and Princess. While I can kind of understand the decision to make Gulliver a rotoscoped human to give him dignity, as he's an outsider, these 2 characters just don't look like they even belong in this movie. How is it that an island filled with silly-looking people happens to have 2 people who look all pretty and dignified? I don't know, but it wouldn't bother me as much if they had some personality beyond just being in love. I guess the Prince is a slightly better character of the 2, as he does take action at times, taking on numerous guards at once, and stopping the spies from shooting Gulliver with his own gun. The Princess, meanwhile, well, she gets sad. The songs they sing are okay, I guess, but this is another category that Snow White has this movie beat in. That said, there are a few fairly enjoyable songs, like Gabby's song, All's Well, though that's mostly because I already knew it from that pre-mentioned cartoon of his I saw. One issue I have with the movie is how slow it is at the beginning. Just before King Bombo declares war on Lilliput, he and King Little spend a rather drawn-out amount of time arranging the wedding. It's a lot like watching the arrangement of a real wedding.
Let's see, what kind of flowers should we get? And what color should they be? And what should we put on the cake? I'd love to have some roses on the icing, but I can't help but wonder if it would clash with the decorating. Also, I wonder if anyone coming is lactose intolerant, and does this dress make my butt look big? I try to keep a good figure, but I tend to eat when I get stressed. Oh, kill me.
And then we spend about 20 minutes watching the Lilliputians tie up the sleeping Gulliver. Sure, it has some amusing gags, but it just goes on and on. I'm just waiting for the guy to wake up already so we can actually get the story moving again. Thankfully, when he does, the story indeed picks up. While I enjoy some visual storytelling like this, sooner or later I want something significant to happen, and no amount of humor can satisfy that. Needless to say, this is my least favorite scene in the movie. My favorite scene is the party that King Little throws, as it has one of the better songs of the film, Bluebirds in the Moonlight, and some entertaining visuals as well. And while Gulliver's rotoscoping looks especially uncanny valley here, his amusement throughout the scene does become quite infectious, and it's fun watching him take part in the festivities. I also give an honorable mention to his speech at the end, which by today's standards is nothing that hasn't been said a million times by now, but gets its message across loud and clear. And it didn't require Jack Black singing an entire song that was already used in numerous other media. Seriously, that movie can go rot. Overall, I liked this movie. Was it great? Not quite. Its rush production and trying to compete with Disney did create some problems for it. I wouldn't consider it fair to make so many comparisons between this and Snow White, as while this was pretty much made specifically to compete with it, it also did its own thing by focusing more on entertainment, as opposed to Snow White, which was mostly about being pretty and feel good. That's kind of where Fleischer in general differs from Disney. That said, Snow White already had plenty of cartoony amusement as well with the dwarfs, and they were a little more engaging to watch overall. I kind of wish they took a little more time with this, instead of having to rush it out just to meet their own deadline. If they took as much time as they needed, we might have gotten a better final product. But regardless, there was still plenty of heart to this. While New Gulliver clearly took much more time to perfect its animation and effects, I'd still say that this movie managed to be a more enjoyable adaptation of Gulliver's Travels overall. Just goes to show that hard work and impressive visuals don't always make the best movies. Isn't that right, James Cameron? So I rate Gulliver's Travels with a 7 out of 10. It wasn't great, but for what it was, I'm glad I took the time to sit down and watch it. While I can most certainly see why this didn't reach the same status as Snow White did, it still deserves to be seen by any fan of classic animation. Right now, it's free to watch on YouTube, and even its own Wikipedia page. Check it out and see just how big your enjoyment is of it. And with this, we reach the end of the 1930s, and thus ends the era of animated movies known as the pre-1940s. But before I officially move on to the 40s, I think I'll take one last retrospective look at the films I've looked at so far. So tune in next time as I give my final thoughts of this early era and a final ranking of the 5 movies I've reviewed from it. Until then, this is Mash It and Smash It, signing off.